Because purpose taps into the core essence of who somebody is. And if you're living your life from that essence, you're going to start to feel satisfied, complete.
Welcome to the Aligned State Podcast. I'm Kristian Livolsi, and today we are having an inspiring conversation. And joining me, my incredible co-host, my guru, my friend, Bronwyn Coles. Welcome to the Aligned State Podcast. I'm Kristian Livolsi, and today we're here and we're going to be diving into one of the most powerful forces behind effective leadership, and that is purpose. So often leaders feel disconnected from their deeper why, and it can leave them overwhelmed and lacking direction. Today, I am joined by my co-host, Bronwyn Coles, who's here to help us uncover how to align your leadership with true purpose and elevate both your life and your business. Bronwyn, let's start with a big one. Why is purpose such a game changer for leaders?
Yeah, because purpose taps into the core essence of who somebody is. And if you're living your life from that essence, you're going to start to feel satisfied, complete, as though you're living with a vibrancy. And that is so critical for you to enjoy your life. So it begins to expand from the center of who you are outward, so that you can drive your leadership from a place of inner knowing. And as you drive your leadership from that place, everybody starts to benefit around you, because that purpose will start to map out things that align you to your values. It will give you greater clarity. It will mean you can communicate better. It gives you the opportunity to really tap into an energy that moves you forward, because that energy comes from a deep well inside of you, that deep knowing inside of you that you've got a direction to go that is going to positively reinforce not only your own life, but that of others.
Awesome. So what does it mean to lead with purpose? So how can business leaders start aligning their leadership with their core values? So I guess there's two questions there, right? So what does it mean to lead with purpose? And the other question is, how can business leaders start aligning their leadership with their core values?
Yeah. So to lead with purpose, essentially they've got to establish what their own purpose is first, so that they know exactly where their North Star is. And once they know that, they can honor themselves and therefore honor the people they work with. And if they're a leader in someone else's business, so they're not an entrepreneur, then they have to check in with the direction of the organization that they live and work with. Because if the organization's sense of purpose or direction is not in alignment with the individual's purpose, or they're contraindicated, it's going to mean that they're always going to be at loggerheads with the organization and the people who are trying to run the organization. So it's really quite an essential part of creating joy in your life. You need to have a sense of your own purpose to be able to start to lead from that and to make choices for yourself around that. Then the next layer out is that as you work with those people in the organization, or your customers or your suppliers, if you're clear on your purpose, then that energy, there's a calmness that comes from that, because you're confident in yourself. And so it starts to guide and shape the way you engage with others. And that integrity runs through the agreements, it runs through the communication, it runs through the space you create for others. And suddenly you start to develop a following, not because you're telling someone to follow you, but you're leading the way. And others will follow you because they can feel the energy that you're bringing to that, the truth that you're bringing to it, the wisdom that you're bringing to it, the alignment that you're bringing to it.
It's the vibe.
Yeah, it is the vibe, or the frequency.
That's right, the frequency, correct.
Yeah.
So, Bronwyn, many leaders get caught up in the day-to-day demands of running a business.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they can lose sight of their purpose.
Yeah.
And I know we've touched a little bit about purpose in a previous episode where we talked about alignment. So we're kind of reversing it here, where we're talking more about purpose rather than alignment, right? Because in alignment, purpose is one of the pieces. So how can business owners and leaders, how can they reconnect with their purpose when life and work start to feel like an overwhelming blur?
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say is space. They need a little bit of space, and there's been, again, lots of studies on this. People that are highly successful leaders will generally carve out some space for themselves. There's people that embark on the 5 a.m. club. There's various other configurations of that. So the commitment to yourself to create space, to firstly recognize where you're at, and then start to tune in to what actually are your true drivers. Your true drivers are underpinned by your purpose. And so creating space to acknowledge that and space to reflect, that reflection is your opportunity to connect, is your opportunity to find your purpose. And reflection can happen in multiple ways, but that time of honoring yourself is vital to be able to connect with that purpose.
Yeah, beautiful. Love it. Okay. So when it comes to purpose-driven leadership, then some leaders may worry about being too soft or not having enough hustle, right? And we all know that I dislike the word hustle profusely. And so how does one balance purpose with the need to take decisive action?
Yeah.
So they've gotten their space, they've gotten their time, but how do they balance purpose with the need to take action?
Yeah.
Decisive action.
Yeah. For me, it sits around boundaries, actually. Because when you're clear about your purpose, if there are things that try to shape you away from that purpose, irrespective of what it is, whether it's a heavy load, whether it's the demands of other people, whatever it is that may try and shift you away from that purpose and the focus of that purpose, it takes a sense of commitment to yourself and therefore an articulation of your boundaries to create the space for you to honor yourself and for you to honor the choices that need to be made in alignment with that purpose. Because the reality is that the only person who can enable you to live your purpose is you. Yeah. We are all responsible. We are sovereign beings. It is a requirement for us to step up into our responsibility if we want to live our life fully. So to do that, we have to make decisions about where we're going to place our energy and how we're going to engage with others. And so that whole thing about overwhelm that comes through many leaders' environments, comes through business owners, entrepreneurs, it's something that starts with boundaries, because if you're not willing to set boundaries for yourself and honor yourself and your needs, then you're immediately avoiding your purpose.
Great. On the topic of, purpose-driven leadership, right? How does a leader's sense of purpose then influence the culture and performance of the business?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one, because one of the things I've noticed with many people I deal with in business is that when they lose their sense of purpose, they lose connection to their sense of purpose. They also lose connection to clear decision making. They lose connection to what is, I'm going to use the terms right and wrong, but it's not the right and wrong as an external sense. It's an internal right and wrong. And so what will happen is that they'll make a decision that they know is not in alignment for them, and they will follow through with that because they think they should. Yeah. And so as that occurs, and they do that repeatedly, every time they make a decision that is not in alignment with their values and their purpose, it's a kind of inner dishonoring. And we know that inside ourselves. Every single person knows that inside themselves. This is another thing that's been, studies have been done on this with small children. Every child knows when they make a choice that is not in alignment with their truth, and that is not dependent on their parents' values. Yeah, we all know what is in alignment with us. We just may not listen to it. So if we don't live from a position of purpose and alignment, it's really easy for us to make choices that actually hurt ourselves, because we're not honoring ourselves, or we're not honoring someone else in the way we want to treat people, or we're not honoring our values. We're not listening to the things that are our core drivers. And that creates an environment of lack of trust. It creates an environment where people make more poor decisions because everyone becomes reactionary. It creates an environment where people feel lost, lonely, sad, miserable, hope that they just hope that they can go home early. They they will try and avoid everything they can to actually give themselves a break. But all they will do is bury themselves in a different kind of energy, whether that's, alcohol or drugs or, overwhelm with food or television or whatever it is that's their thing. It's a distraction away from the sensation of knowing within themselves that something's not right.
Absolutely. Great. And it's true. There's that disconnection that happens, and that's what people need to be really
Yeah.
worried about. So let's for leaders who may not have the clarity of their purpose, Bronwyn,
Yeah.
right? Yet, how do they begin the journey of discovering it?
Yeah. We talked about space earlier. For me, it's the starting to create space for themselves. But I also think sometimes if they're very overwhelmed, sometimes they need a guide, that they need to be able to tune in and someone to support them as they go through that journey, just to help bring them back to center. And I guess the criteria for choosing a guide is one that is not going to attach them to a doctrine, but one that is going to help them tune into themselves. Yeah.
Someone
And
who's going to help them align, right? Like,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there's got to be alignment with that person too. Like,
absolutely.
to me, I'm a big believer that this it when you recruit people in your organization, they need to be aligned, right, with your values. It doesn't mean they have to have the same values. They need to be aligned with your values. Same thing when you're choosing a helper, right? Or
Mm,
you're choosing a consultant, you're choosing a coach, a mentor, a guru. You have
mm,
to have an alignment. Like if you and I had not had an alignment,
yeah,
there's no way we could have worked together, let alone create the aligned state,
yeah,
right?
that's right.
And I think that that's fundamentally important to any relationship.
Yeah.
We see divorce rates are so high, and it's because people got married for lust. They got married for a whole bunch of other bullshit. There was no alignment, right? Like,
Mm,
I look at my wife, and she's gonna hate me for this. You know, and Lucy and I, we met in 2013, and it was like, wow. And then we got together in 2014, and within a very short period of time, we both had made an instant decision that, okay, we're gonna have a child. And people might think that that's normal, not normal. For someone like me who was 37 years old, 36, 37 years old, didn't want to get married, didn't really want to have children, I was happy to be, the person I was, partying, building companies, living that lifestyle. There was an alignment, right? Now, we are actually very different people. And it's
yeah,
not like we've gone, oh my God, 10 years, 11, 12 years later, we're different people. Not at all. It's like, but we have different values.
yeah,
But we support each other. And well, she doesn't think I support her enough, but we support each other, right? And I think the difference is I've always been the person that I am. She's changing. And we have these discussions all the time. And she goes, no, I've just had enough of you being an asshole all the time. I'm like, I haven't changed, right? Your resilience is not growing, right? And
Mhm.
so we have a laugh about it. And in our house, it's been challenging at the moment. Kids are on holidays. Lucy's had a hip replacement, which is a really big operation for someone her age. And she's young, not the other way around. She's walking around with a walking stick, so she might be perceived as senior citizen. Unfortunately, there was no disability parking spot, so it hasn't helped. Um, but um, but it's been really challenging on her because she hasn't actually been able to do anything.
Mm,
And so we're hoping that the hip replacement is going to make those changes. But all of those things actually, I know we talk about leadership, but leadership is also self-leadership. And even though we've got alignment with certain things, and yet we believe we have different parenting styles. She doesn't like mine. I kind of disagree with her sometimes too, but she's a way better parent than I am, because she's really good at being present, right? Whereas I've got all these other competing priorities. But then at the same time, when I am present with my children, I'm present. And
mm,
so there's all this unconditional love that pours out. So
mm,
in leadership, even with your own teams, and I guess I'm digressing a little bit. I think what's really important, people that are feeling overwhelmed, leaders that are out there, it's normal to feel overwhelmed in the environment that we're in now. We've just come from a black swan event that we
mm.
we haven't had since the other previous black swan event was World War II. right? And so most people had never been through World War II, right?
Mm.
So no one knew. But in this case, we actually shut down the whole bloody world.
Yeah.
And then what's happened is that people have become entitled to this whole, I need more balance in my life. And then that
Mm.
balance has become, well, I want to work from home forever. So I can do
Mm.
my washing and my cooking and my ironing while I'm actually doing my job because I'm not really doing my job. And see, it's interesting. You've been an employee and you're an employer, but you
Mm.
don't have any of those entitlements. You actually work harder because you
Mm.
have an ownership mentality. And I
Yeah.
say this to business owners that we work with, it's normal to feel that way. But if you don't surround yourself with people who also have that same
Mm.
energy and connection, and you can feel the vibe, the energy vibrations rising. Because I love this stuff and that's essentially why we created this podcast.
Mm.
It's why we tell stories that are deep and we get vulnerable about it, right? Like you've had your own stories and your own convictions, your own challenges that have made you who you are, right?
Mm.
And I always say to people, you've got to surround yourself with people that align, right?
Yeah.
And they understand, right? And in the current market, it's really hard. Yeah, I see business owners who are like, well, how can I lead a bunch of people who don't even come to the office?
Mm.
Well, you've got the wrong boundaries, mate. Oh, but if I get them to come back to the office, they'll leave. They'll let them leave. They're not aligned with your vision at that point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there is a lot of science and a lot of data coming out that says
Yeah.
that work from home are ineffective. So,
Yeah.
and that doesn't apply to everyone. But again, the majority in this instant are
Yeah.
ineffective.
But I think the thing that's interesting about alignment and alignment when you're aligned with yourself, but also there's a team alignment or a business alignment, it actually builds trust. And whether that is in an intimate relationship, between parents and children, whether it's a partnership, whether, it's friendships, alignment. And if you honor your own alignment, then people know they can trust you because they start to see and feel, they energetically feel, they feel when that alignment is there because there's a centeredness and a calmness in it. Because even if they don't like your alignment, they know who you are because it's true. Yeah. And that means that they can trust you. Even if they don't like your behavior, they can trust that. They know where it sits. It's when people try and disguise it or they don't
Were you like, without pointing at me, going,
I
I
wasn't
don't like your
pointing at
behavior
you.
sometimes, but I know who you are.
But it's the reality is, none of us are going to be loved by everybody. But if you're
Yeah,
true to yourself, then people will know they can trust you to be who you are.
I think it's really important. And I think, you know, you've got to be who you are, and in order for you to live your best life, you've got to be you, right? And one thing I learned early in my life and in my career was don't care about what other people think, right? If you spend too much time caring about what other people think, you'll end up doing nothing with your life.
Yeah.
Um, and some people always say, yeah, but that's why you've made so many mistakes and you've pissed off people along the way. And I kind of reflect on when people say that to me, and no one said it to me for a very long time. I think because people have come to the conclusion that I actually have a shit ton of friends, and that actually I don't have that many people that I've actually pissed off. It's perception, right? And I kind of reframe that where if you're going to judge me on the first time you've met me, or better still, you're going to judge me and you've never met me, which is
Mm.
fascinating in itself, then you are definitely not good enough to be in my circle of trust.
Mm. Mm.
And the amount of time, as soon as I did that as a leader,
Mm.
the wrong people in my organizations left, the right people came.
Yeah.
And that's your point about, trust. And I think for me, becoming very vulnerable with people, sharing things that,
Yeah.
most people wouldn't share, that
Yeah.
creates that trust. And, people often, this is why I said my wife's not going to like this because she's very private, whereas hey,
Yeah.
let's put it all out in the world. And the reason is I had to. I'm a strategist, and the strategic advice when I looked inwards was if people don't get to see who I am,
Yeah.
truly see who I am, then they're not going to want to work with me because I'm a 6'4", 6 foot wide, bald head, old man, right? And yet, what is it? 84% of our client base across the whole group is women.
Yeah.
And why? Because being able to be vulnerable allows that feminine energy to come out.
Yeah.
Yet I have enough masculine energy to draw that back in, but it's
Mm,
the empathy. Women have far more empathy than men. I've
mm,
grown up my whole life with two single mums, one on each side, right?
mm,
And most of the influences, the great influences in my life, actually have all been women.
mm,
You know, my great aunt who recently passed away, my grandmother who passed away 7 years ago, they're all women that they grew up through World War II. They were in their 90s. And, you know, and I was clearly always the favorite because I was the first born male in an Italian family. But I think the truth is, I was the favorite because I also learned how to love because they showed me how to love. And I think as
mm,
a leader, if you do not know how to love, and this is probably the criticism that Elon gets, and again, I'm going to touch on Elon because I'm reading the that's probably his biggest criticism. He does not know how to love,
mm,
right? And that's the criticism of all of his wives and partners and people that know him. And so that's because he lacks that empathy. Now, you know, he kind of goes, it's because of my Asperger's, but I think you can also, as a leader at your caliber, be accountable for
mm,
that. The truth is, I think deep down, he doesn't give a shit,
mm.
right? And that's because he's so clear on his purpose. And I
Yeah.
think that's where you got blinkers. And I think if you want to be a true great leader, and I think
Mm,
that's where, say, him and Steve Jobs have so many similarities, people kind of just accepted that they're such geniuses who've done so many things that that behavior is okay. The reality of it is that behavior is not okay. Doesn't
mm,
matter how you look at it, right? If you diminish someone on a consistent, regular basis, then that's not okay, right?
mm,
It's not. It's never been okay.
mm,
And I'm not going to get political about it and and whatnot, but I'm still very proud of being Australian and being really proud of being South Australian because in South Australia we've been a place of innovation forever, and yet we are frowned upon as this nanny state. We've become a nanny state over the years because people have you know enjoyed it way too much, but that's coming out now. But we were the first country in the world and the first state in Australia that allowed women to vote in the 1950s,
mm,
and I should never forget that, right?
mm,
We created, penicillin was founded here essentially by Howard Florey, who went to St. Peter's College, right?
mm,
And yet we commercialize these technologies. Wi-Fi. You
mm,
look at all these innovations that stemmed from here at some point.
mm,
Someone was telling me the other day that solar power technology cells were
mm.
actually created by someone in a Philips factory here in South Australia. Now, I don't know if that's a correct fact, but I did some research and I was like, wow, there is a lot of linkage here. And so
Mm,
you kind of go, and it's not just South Australian, but I'm a proud Australian and a
mm.
proud South Australian for that matter. And I know that people all over the world are going to be going, where's Adelaide? Right? Well, Adelaide is at the bottom of Australia. We have the very Mediterranean climate. We have lots of beautiful beaches and close to the hills, where you are. Look at
Yeah.
magnificent garden that you boast at home that requires like two full-time gardeners, right? Someone's very posh. But look, I think overall, Bronwyn, look, this has been an amazing conversation, right? And I think what's really key, and I want to just one thing to bring it back because I know we've gone to different places, but what's one action that you would tell our listeners to take today to start that process of realignment, right? If
Yeah.
they're feeling stuck, right,
Yeah.
or they're struggling, what would you say to them?
The first thing I'd say is start to be the observer of your own life. So notice when something feels out of sorts. You don't have to do anything about it initially, just observe it. And, often when because I teach yoga as well, as you know, and teach meditation. And, part of the gift we can give ourselves is the gift of observation, so noticing how we feel, noticing what we see without judging ourselves. And that requires a willingness, like you say, to be vulnerable and vulnerable to ourselves, firstly, so we can then be vulnerable to others. And as we take the action of just being the witness of our own lives, we start to notice what triggers us, what creates a response in our body that makes us feel uncomfortable. We start to notice when we feel uplifted in certain situations. We start to notice when we feel that there's a vacancy in our life or our awareness. And as we start to be the observer and we give ourselves permission not to judge ourselves, it gives us the opportunity to go deeper and deeper into that understanding. And you can just do it in a moment of sitting there, rather than flicking on the phone. Give yourself a moment and just notice where you are. Notice the trees, notice the pavement, notice the people, notice how you feel in your body, and just start to connect And if you're really overwhelmed or really drained, just even observe that and then let it go from your mind. You don't have to then go, my life is crappy, the world's coming to an end. Just let yourself observe it because nothing will stay the way it is. Everything will change. Even if you observe absolute joy, profound moment of alignment where you just think, oh, I've just nailed it. My life is just ace, that too will change at some point. The reality is there's an ebb and flow of the sensations through our body and our mind and our emotions. And so allowing ourselves to tap into that gives us the opportunity to honor who we are. And it's the start of connecting. It's the start of bringing ourselves to the surface. It's the start of honoring our sovereignty. It's the start of us looking for our purpose, our values, our alignment. Because when we do that, then you go from just being reactive and protective into being empowered. And that is fabulous.
It's powerful. Bronwyn, this has been such an enlightening conversation. Lots of vulnerability, lots of education. Purpose is truly the key to authentic leadership. It's also the key to realignment and alignment with your people. I want to thank you for hanging out with me, and for being my friend, my guru, my guide. And I want to thank all the listeners for tuning into this episode of the Aligned State podcast.
Thank you.
If you're ready to bring more purpose into your leadership, don't forget to subscribe if this is the first time that you're here. If it's not the first time that you're here, please share this episode with others that you think would benefit. You don't have to just be in business to benefit from these conversations. As you know, the stories that we share. More importantly, if you're ready to make that next step and you want the support of people that have the energy, the vibe, the alignment, the tools, the skills, join Bronwyn and I every single week for 2 live sessions behind closed doors, where we do live. Bronwyn will take us through a guided live meditation. Plus, there are 5 pre-recorded meditations that change week on week to keep people focused and grounded. And then we also do 2 sessions, one where we dive deep into one of the core topics. We have 12 topics that we focus on, 1 per month, and we get really deep dive into that. And then we have a follow-up on a Wednesday where we reflect on that and try and integrate it into our lives. And the objective is to create alignment and to create fulfillment and to create a feeling and sense of belonging in this world. And the best part about it is we've created it at the cost of a cup of coffee per day. So you don't need the coffee, the caffeine, to give you that kick. If you join the Aligned State, I guarantee you that you'll have a kick for your entire day from the cost of 1 cup of coffee. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Bronwyn, and thank you. And until next time, stay aligned and keep leading with purpose.
Thanks, guys.